Back when websites were clumsy things built by ordinary people, when pages were grey, blue and badly organised, when you could stumble across something strange at 2 a.m. and have no easy way to prove whether any of it was real. In 2001, a man calling himself Ted began posting updates about a narrow cave passage he and a friend were trying to break open. At first it sounded like a journal. Then it became unsettling. Then it became frightening. Because beyond that hole in the stone, something may have been waiting long before they arrived.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Okay, caller 1 wins courtside seats to tonight's game.
What? I won floor seats?
You did.
I've been calling for 13 months.
Wait, Chris?
Yes, I finally did it.
What are you gonna wear?
Men's Warehouse. They've got today's looks for any occasion, and I need to look like a celebrity.
Don't want to stick out.
Exactly. They've got Chill Flex by Kenneth Cole, Joseph Abboud, and a tailor at every store for the perfect fit.
Congrats. You can stop calling now.
Not a chance.
Get any look for every occasion at Men's Warehouse. Love the way you look.
Support for this podcast comes from Progressive, America's #1 boat insurer. We've all made mistakes on the water, but there's one mistake you shouldn't make: being uninsured. With Progressive Boat Insurance, you can choose coverage for most mistakes you or other boaters could make, helping you float carefree all season long. Quote today: Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. #1 rating based on 2024 filings with state departments of insurance.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
At Uber, every single driver is required to pass a thorough background check before they can start driving. That means any prospective driver goes through a multi-step screening process, checking for any impaired driving or criminal offenses. But the checks don't stop there. Every year, every Uber driver is background checked again, so the person picking you up today meets the same standards as the day they started.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Annual driver screenings from Uber. One more way Uber is putting safety at every turn. Learn more at uber.com/safety.
Hello, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Toby.
And welcome to the Whispering Woods podcast. This episode is all about
Ted the Caver.
Yeah, I'm quite excited about this. Ted the Caver it is. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Whispering Woods, where we have a number of tiers, and you can listen ad-free for a small monthly fee. We are also on Apple Premium, where you can subscribe directly in the app. I've got a promo to share today, and this is for the lovely Chris, who hosts They're Not Shadows. So I'm going to pop that and play that now, and if you are interested, please go over to his feed and have a listen.
You're driving alone. Night a little too quiet. You flip through stations, and something finds you.
She didn't shiver, didn't make any move to warm herself. She just sat there, dripping onto the seat and staring straight ahead.
So what happened? Car breakdown?
Something like that.
Where can I take you?
Just keep driving.
Okay.
Something felt off. The way she sat so still. The way she spoke.
Hell of a night to be out.
I've seen worse.
If you like your paranormal stories told as audio dramas, then They're Not Shadows might just be the podcast for you.
If you dare. Hey.
So there we go. As I said, if you're interested, I would leave a link in the podcast notes so you can go and take a listen to They're Not Shadows. Right. Let's get into this story, shall we?
We shall.
Are you ready for the story?
Yes, I am.
To understand why this story mattered, it helps to remember what the internet felt like at the turn of the millennium. Today, if somebody posts something unusual online, thousands of strangers immediately analyse it, reverse image search it, argue over it, parody it, and turn it into content by lunchtime. In 2001, things moved differently. Personal websites were common. Many were made by enthusiasts who simply wanted to share photographs, hobbies, diaries, or odd collections of interests. One of the most recognisable hosts of that era was Angelfire, a service that allowed ordinary people to build free web pages, often decorated with clashing backgrounds and blinding text. Hidden among countless fan pages and personal journals were stranger corners of the web, places stumbled upon almost by accident. Somewhere among them was Ted's caving page. Ted presented himself as an ordinary man with an ordinary passion. He liked caves. He explored them with friends. He posted photographs and updates. He did not provide his full name, and he avoided identifying the exact cave system he was discussing. That restraint made sense. Real cavers often protect locations from vandalism, theft, or inexperienced thrill seekers who might get themselves killed underground. Nothing about the page initially screamed fiction. It was practical, matter of fact, and full of details that seemed too dull to be invented. There were references to gear, route choices, awkward crawls, familiar chambers, and the mundane discomfort of squeezing through wet limestone for fun. Ted wrote about a regular exploring partner he referred to only as B. Together they knew a particular cave system well. They had travelled through it enough times to become comfortable with its hazards. And anyone who spends enough time in dangerous places can become casual about risks that would terrify everyone else. Then one trip changed everything. Deep within the cave, in a place they thought they understood, they noticed a small opening in the wall. Not a grand tunnel, not some dramatic doorway hidden by stalactites, just a tight hole in the rock. And through it, air was moving. To anyone who had never entered a cave, a breeze through stone may sound insignificant. Underground explorers know better. Moving air suggests space somewhere beyond the barrier. It can mean another chamber, a secondary system, an unseen route connecting passages nobody has yet mapped. In a world of dead ends and collapsed tunnels, airflow can feel like an invitation. Ted and Bee crouched beside the opening and shone their lights inside. The hole was too narrow for either man to pass through, but the wall itself did not seem especially thick. Beyond the first tight section, Ted believed he could make out a crawl space that widened farther in. It was impossible to know for certain from that angle, but it was enough to trigger the most dangerous force in exploration: curiosity. They listened. The air moved steadily through the crack, cool against their faces. Occasionally there was another sound, a faint low rumble somewhere beyond. Ted suggested it might be distant traffic, echoing through rock, or vibrations from the world above. It was odd, but not alarming. Caves carry and distort sound in strange ways. What seems close can be far away. What seems impossible can have a simple explanation. So they made a decision. They would enlarge the opening. Ted jokingly named the gap Floyd's Tomb, after Floyd Collins, whose tragic death trapped inside a Kentucky cave in 1925 became famous across the United States. It was the sort of dark humour people in risky hobbies often use, a way of mocking danger so it feels smaller. At the time, it was only a joke. Later, readers would see it as the first warning. The next trips into the cave were not exciting. They were hard labour disguised as adventure. Ted and Bee carried tools through narrow passages and down awkward drops. They hauled in drills, masonry bits, steel bars, hammers, batteries, lights, bags, and whatever else might help them carve inches from solid rock. Then they worked. They drilled holes. They hammered edges loose. They scraped debris back out of the opening by hand. Dust coated their faces and stuck in their throats. Their shoulders bruised against stone, knees and elbows ground raw on the cave floor. Progress was slow enough to be demoralising, but progress existed, and that was enough to keep them coming back. Each visit made it harder to walk away, because each visit represented time already spent, effort already suffered, discomfort already paid for. Ted wrote in a plain, almost cheerful style about the routine of it all. Long drives, motel stays, returning underground the next morning, reaching Floyd's tomb already tired, then spending hours widening a gap nobody else cared about. On one of the later trips, Ted and Bee brought Bee's small dog, a Jack Russell Terrier, accustomed to joining them on outdoor adventures. The plan was practical enough. If Floyd's tomb became wide enough, perhaps the dog could slip through first and give them some clue about what lay beyond the squeeze. A dog might bark at a drop, hesitate at water, or simply confirm that the passage continued. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The dog behaved normally during the approach, moving ahead, circling back, full of the restless confidence small dogs often carry. But the closer they came to Floyd's tomb, the more the animal changed. Its tail lowered, its movement slowed. It stayed close to Bee instead of exploring. Then it began whining. By the time they reached the opening, the dog wanted no part of it. Ted wrote that it refused to approach the gap at all. It would not go near the hole. It trembled, kept its distance, and watched the dark opening with fixed attention. Ted noted the behaviour, but he did not turn back. That matters. Because throughout the story, there are multiple opportunities for common sense to win. The dog's fear was one of them. Yet by this stage, Ted and Bee were invested. The opening had become part of their routine, part of their identity as explorers. Strange behaviour from a dog could be dismissed as scent, nerves, fatigue, or nothing at all. So they worked. They drilled and chipped at the stone, while the dog remained agitated nearby. Then came another oddity. Ted described hearing grinding or scraping sounds from beyond the passage. Something shifting deeper inside the hidden space. Caves do move and settle naturally, so even this could have been explained away. Yet almost immediately afterward, the airflow through Floyd's tomb stopped. The steady cool breeze that had always moved through the gap died. Silence settled over the opening. The men sat there in the dark, surrounded by tools and dust, listening to a hole in the wall that had suddenly gone still. Even then, they did not abandon the project. That stubbornness is central to the legend. If Ted had turned around at the first sign of unease, there would be no story. Instead, he behaved exactly as many real people do when something strange happens in a place they believe they understand. He rationalised it. Air currents change. Rocks shift. Dogs get nervous. Keep working. And so they did. The opening grew wider. Ted began measuring where the shoulders might pass. They tested angles. They considered how a body might twist through. What had begun as curiosity was now obsession. The cave was no longer simply something to explore. It had become something to defeat. That was when the story moved from uneasy to disturbing. Because on another trip, while they were again working at Floyd's tomb, Ted heard a sound from the darkness beyond the gap that no explanation could comfortably soften. A scream. Ted described it as a full-bodied cry, loud enough and human enough to freeze both men where they stood. It came from somewhere beyond Floyd's tomb, from the passage they had spent weeks trying to reach. For a few moments, neither man moved. That reaction alone makes the scene believable. Real fear rarely produces dramatic speeches or immediate action. It often produces stillness, while the mind scrambles to fit what it has heard into something ordinary. Ted could not. Neither could be. Then instinct overruled thought. Ted began shoving rocks back into the opening, stacking them into the gap he had worked so hard to widen. It was a revealing response. He did not reach for the drill or call into the darkness. He tried to create a barrier. And then, as suddenly as before, the airflow stopped again. The breeze through the passage died. The low rumble vanished. The cave became silent. That should have ended everything. Most listeners hearing the story now imagine themselves turning around at that point and never returning. They imagine sunlight, fresh air, normal life, and a complete refusal to ever crawl back underground. Yet the next part of Ted's account may be the most human detail in the whole legend. They came back. Not because they were fearless, but because uncertainty can be harder to live with than danger. If the scream had an explanation, they wanted it. If the sound had been misheard, they wanted to prove it. If something was beyond the wall, they wanted to know. Curiosity is often strongest after fear, so they returned to Floyd's tomb and continued enlarging the hole. By now it was close to passable. Ted began attempting to force himself through. This is where the story takes on a physical horror no ghost tale can imitate. He had to remove gear, angle his shoulders and flatten his chest by breathing out. The opening was too tight for a normal crawl. It required commitment. Once partly inside, he could not simply stand up or turn around. stone pressed against back, chest, hips, and face. Progress came in inches, using toes and elbows where space allowed. At times he had to rest with his cheek against rock, because there was nowhere else to place his head. He described the humiliating mechanics of it all, testing whether he could inhale, backing out a little to reposition, pushing again, feeling bone scrape stone, learning exactly how much room a ribcage needs when emptied of air. It was not heroic, it was grim, uncomfortable, and deeply claustrophobic. At one point, B tied webbing around Ted's ankles so he could drag him out if he became trapped. Even now, that image alone is enough to unsettle people. Ted failed on his first serious attempt. He retreated bruised and frustrated. But failure only confirms something worse than impossibility. He was close enough to believe success could be forced. And once somebody believes that, they often stop asking whether success is wise. Ted returned again. He practiced angles, measured spaces, considered removing more clothing. Floyd's tomb had become less a tunnel than a personal contest between his body and the earth. Eventually, after enough effort and enough stubbornness, he won. He squeezed through. And on the far side, the darkness opened into somewhere no one in that group had ever seen before. Ted described space beyond the squeeze, not fast at first, but enough to move and breathe more freely. There were formations catching the light, mineral surfaces that glittered under torch beams, and further passages leading onward into darkness. The cave system continued. For Ted, that justified everything. The drills, the exhaustion, the dog's panic, the scream, the doubts, all of it could now be framed as the price of discovery. He pushed farther in. One chamber contained crystals, bright enough to stand out in his memory. Another area held markings on the wall that he found difficult to explain. They were not ancient runes or dramatic symbols in the cinematic sense, more like rough lines or shapes that seemed deliberate enough to notice, strange enough to remember, and ambiguous enough to trouble readers later. Then there was the stone. Ted described a round rock positioned oddly in one chamber, almost as though placed rather than naturally settled. Many caves contain boulders and collapsed debris, of course. Rocks lie where gravity leaves them, but readers fixated on this detail because it seemed too pointed to be meaningless. A round stone, in a chamber beyond a hidden squeeze. At the time, Ted did not treat it as sinister. It was simply one more unusual feature in a place full of unusual features. And because B could not comfortably pass through Floyd's tomb, Ted was often alone on the far side. But Ted still kept returning. Soon they decided to bring a third caver, a thinner, more experienced man Ted called Joe. Joe would be able to pass through the squeeze more easily, and perhaps a fresh pair of eyes would make the new chambers feel ordinary again. That may have been part of the motivation, even if unspoken. When something begins to feel unsettling, people often invite others into it, hoping their calmness will neutralize the atmosphere. But Ted and B reportedly did not tell Joe everything. They did not emphasize the scream. They did not dwell on the dog. They did not mention how the airflow died. Instead, they focused on what mattered to cavers. They had opened a new route. They had found unexplored passage. They had something worth seeing. Joe agreed to join them. When they returned to the cave, he slipped through Floyd's tomb with comparative ease, proving how much of Ted's struggle had been physical mismatch rather than impossibility. Ted followed, but during the trip, he struck his head badly enough to feel shaken and unwell. Rather than continue deeper, he stayed back while Joe moved on alone. The decision hangs over the legend, because when Joe returned, something about him had changed. Ted wrote that he looked disturbed, pale, tense, dusty and cut up. More importantly, he behaved like someone who wanted distance from whatever he had just experienced. When questioned, Joe gave vague or contradictory answers. He denied seeing landmarks Ted knew were obvious. He offered little explanation. He did not want to discuss what lay further in. Afterward, according to the story, he wanted nothing more to do with the cave. For readers, Joe's reaction carried weight. Ted might be obsessed. Ted might be suggestible. Ted might be dramatising events. But Joe was the outsider, the new witness, the man with no investment in the legend forming around Floyd's tomb. And Joe wanted away from it. That alone would have been enough for many people to stop. Instead, Ted prepared for another return. This time, he wanted proof. He and Bea assembled better equipment the next trip. Ted brought a video camera so that whatever lay beyond Floyd's tomb could finally be recorded rather than described from memory. They also brought a field telephone connected by wire, allowing Ted to stay in contact with Bea while moving deeper into the chambers on the far side of the squeeze. It was practical gear, the sort of thing serious hobbyists improvise when pushing into awkward spaces, and it gave the story another layer of realism that many readers found convincing. When they reached the cave, Ted once again forced himself through the narrow passage. By now he knew the technique well enough to make it seem almost routine. At first the trip went well. He filmed the passage, the walls, the crystals, and the route into the newly discovered chambers. He described moving carefully through areas already familiar from previous visits. The odd markings were still there, the round stone was still there. The deeper darkness beyond remained unexplored enough to pull at him. Using the field phone, he checked in with Bea from time to time. The conversations were brief and practical, just enough to confirm everything was functioning and that he was all right. Ted moved further than before. Then he heard it again. The scraping sound came from somewhere behind him, louder now and much closer than on earlier trips. He reacted instinctively, spinning too quickly in the confined space and striking his head against the cave roof hard enough to damage his primary light. Suddenly, the chamber that had seemed manageable became a trap. His best source of light was gone. He still had weaker backup illumination and chemical glow sticks, but anyone who has spent time in darkness knows how much confidence depends on reliable light. Ted tried contacting Bea through the phone, but according to the account, he could not raise him. Now he was alone, beyond Floyd's tomb, partially injured, with limited light, no clear communication, and the memory of something heavy scraping stone somewhere in the darkness. He threw a glow stick into the chamber to create a wider pool of light. The weak green illumination showed no obvious figure waiting there. Instead, it showed something subtler and more disturbing. The round stone had moved. Ted was certain of where it had been before. Now it sat elsewhere, and beneath the place it once occupied was an opening he had not seen previously, a slanted passage leading deeper into the earth. At almost the same moment, another detail intruded. A foul smell began to spread through the chamber. Ted described it as overpowering and rotten, something wet, stale, and deeply wrong. Human beings react strongly to odour because smell bypasses rational thought faster than sight or sound. Whatever composure he had maintained up to that point began to collapse. The deeper passage beneath the shifted stone no longer looked like discovery. It looked like exposure. Something hidden had been uncovered, and the chamber around him felt suddenly occupied. He turned toward Floyd's tomb and began retreating as quickly as the terrain allowed. He stumbled, scraped himself on the walls, and dragged equipment behind him with none of the careful method that had characterized earlier trips. Somewhere behind him, he believed he heard the scraping sound again. When he reached the squeeze, B was shouting from the far side. Even B, who had remained outside the passage, could smell the stench now and was urging Ted to hurry. Getting through Floyd's tomb had once been an achievement. Escaping through it became an act of desperation. Ted forced himself into the narrow gap, with no concern now for skin, clothing, or technique. He jammed, twisted, tore himself loose, and shoved forward through the stone, until he dropped out the other side, battered and half-blinded by adrenaline. Neither man waited to rest. Both headed immediately for the route out of the cave. Ted and B reached the rope climb that formed one of the last obstacles before daylight. B began ascending first, while Ted dealt with loose rope below, trying to organise it quickly enough to follow. Both men were injured, shaken, and moving with the blunt urgency of people who no longer cared about neat procedure. Then came one of the most memorable details in the entire legend. Ted felt the rope tighten in his hands. At first, that alone could have had several explanations. Rope catches, it snags on projections. But according to Ted, the tension did not feel random. It increased steadily, as though someone below them had taken hold of the line and was drawing it back into the darkness. He described the rope beginning to move away from him. Ted abandoned caution and began climbing. B reached the top first. When Ted neared the exit, B used a knife to cut the rope loose. The line whipped away and disappeared back into the cave. The two men emerged from the cave scratched, exhausted, and badly shaken. Neither celebrated. Neither spoke of further exploration in any excited sense. They left the site and returned home. If the account had ended there, Ted the Caver would still likely be remembered as an effective tale of subterranean dread. But the final section of the story is what transformed it from eerie adventure into a legend people continued discussing years later. Because, according to Ted, the cave did not stay behind when he left it. It came home with him. In the days that followed, he wrote that ordinary life became difficult to trust. Sleep no longer arrived easily. Rooms felt wrong after dark. The silence of the house seemed to contain sounds that vanished whenever he focused on them. Ted began hearing movement at night, soft steps, scraping noises, shifts in other rooms. He described leaving lights on more than usual, then more lights than that. Darkness, once merely absence, had become associated with whatever waited beyond his damaged torch underground. In the days after the escape, Ted wrote that the physical injuries were the easiest part to understand. Cuts heal, bruises fade, sore muscles loosen. What troubled him was everything else. He wrote of seeing shapes at the edge of his vision, not figures standing clearly before him, but the sort of movement that vanishes the moment you turn your head. A darkness where darkness should not be, a presence suggested rather than shown. He visited a doctor and obtained medication to help him sleep. Though he never fully explained the cause, he also bought a gun, and the entries grow increasingly strained. The practical caver, who once described drills and passage widths, now sounded like a man trying to keep hold of reason, while something intangible pressed steadily closer. He researched strange folklore connected to caves and underground creatures. He searched for explanations online, but nothing settled it. Then came one of the coldest moments in the story. Ted wrote that he went driving one night, unable to rest, and ended up at an overlook above the city. There, already waiting in the dark, was Joe. No arrangement had been made, no invitation had been sent. Joe was simply there. The two men spoke, and the implication was clear. Joe had not escaped untouched either. Whatever silence he carried after returning from the cave had grown into something heavier. He too was unsettled. He too seemed to change. Joe wanted to go back, not out of curiosity, not for adventure, for answers. Ted agreed. They would return one final time. Ted went to see B as well. B let him in, and Ted noticed every light in the house was on. Whatever happened underground, none of them had truly left it behind. The next morning, Ted updated the website. He wrote that he was going back to the cave. This time he listed the supplies he intended to bring: a gun, a knife, food, water, rope, first aid equipment, multiple light sources, a camera, paper and pencil. Everything needed either for exploration or for a confrontation he could not quite name. He said that by the time most people read the update, he would already be there. He promised to post again when he returned. The entry was dated May 19th, 2001. No further update ever appeared. The page simply stopped. There was no neat ending, just silence. And that silence is what made Ted the Caver endure. Because somewhere in the early years of the internet, on a crude little webpage few expected to remember, a man announced he was going back underground one last time, then vanished into the dark forever.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
We've been the trusted experts since 1960 because nobody knows tires better than we do. And with over 90 tire brands, we have an abundance of options in stock for your vehicle. Buy and drive today at discounttire.com. Let's get you taken care of.
Not only is that story creepy, but just the idea of being in caves, for me, because I get really claustrophobic, is also freaky.
Yeah, wouldn't like that.
No, I really wouldn't, but it's a brilliant story, and I really wanted to share it with everybody. I don't know if everybody's heard of this before, but it's a classic, so there we go.
Yeah, well that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
We will indeed. We will catch you again on Thursday for the Reddit and listener story episode. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.
Refresh your next pasta night by shaking up your red sauce routine with Bertolli Alfredo, America's #1 selling Alfredo sauce. Bertolli Alfredo is made with fresh cream, real butter, and aged Parmesan cheese. And just like all Bertolli sauces, it's inspired by Tuscany and rooted in over 160 years of Italian tradition. Rethink pasta night. Take the Alfredo. Bertolli. Buy now at a grocer near you. Source Circana Total U.S. Multi-Outlet White Sauce Dollars Units Pound Sales Calendar Year 2025.
Okay, caller 1 wins courtside seats to tonight's game.
What? I won floor seats?
You did.
I've been calling for 13 months.
Wait, Chris?
Yes, I finally did it.
What are you going to wear?
Men's Warehouse. They've got today's looks for any occasion, and I need to look like a celebrity.
Don't want to stick out.
Exactly. They've got Chill Flex by Kenneth Cole, Joseph Abood, and a tailor at every store for the perfect fit.
Congrats. You can stop calling now.
Not a chance.
Get any look for every occasion at Men's Warehouse. Love the way you look.
Here's a tip for you. There's a podcast out there with fans waiting to be your next customer. They tune in every week, they trust the host, and that host wants to talk about brands like yours in their own words to their audience. The problem is, you just haven't been introduced yet. We're Acast, where that introduction happens. As the world's largest podcast marketplace, we let you browse shows, see who's listening, and book host-read sponsorships or run your own ads all from one platform. Transparent pricing, real-time data, complete control. Start advertising on podcasts by visiting acast.com/advertise.
The stories told on the Whispering Woods are inspired by historical records, witness reports, and local folklore. While every effort is made to research and represent events accurately, some details, names, and locations may differ from official accounts or have been changed out of respect for those involved. These episodes are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes and should not be considered definitive fact or investigative journalism.